Are you looking to create some beautiful watercolor hand lettering? Welcome to Sunlit Brushstrokes. My name is Jessica, and today I'm going to be sharing with you some tips that you can use to transform your basic handwriting into beautiful watercolor hand lettering. I'm going to be using this outline from my Etsy shop that you can download and follow along, but you can also take the tips that I share with you today and apply those to your own hand lettering projects. Let's go ahead and get started. So to get started today, I have written the word rejoice on a couple of small pieces of Arch watercolor paper, just so that you can see how I'm going to be using the technique and where I'm going to be going thick, where I'm going to be going thin. And you can apply these concepts to any words or writing of your own. For my colors, I do have some of my quinacridone rose, and this is going to be my primary color that I'm using for this project, but I also do have some yellow. This is Hansa Yellow Deep with just a tiny little touch of quinacridone rose in it, just to kind of make it a little bit more of a golden color. And then I do have some purple as well. What I'm going to be doing is dropping my pinks in first, and then I'm going to try and keep the yellow and the purple separate from each other, so they can touch the pink, but they can't touch each other. So you'll see what I mean as I go here. And the reason that I've printed two of these is because you might want to just do your normal handwriting, and then we'll talk about how to thicken your letters in some places, how to go thick versus thin. But if you're going to trace this same outline that I'm using for today's project, the thick versus the thin is already there, and you can decide if you want to trace it that way, if that makes sense. So you can see the thickness of the letters where I've gone thick. So I'm going to be using, for my brush today, a number 6 Simply Simmons brush, because it's a little firmer, and the firmer brushes are nicer for lettering. You can use a softer brush like the Artegria Round for dropping extra colors in. So I'll probably use an extra brush for that, but definitely for the bulk of your writing, you're going to want a firmer brush for that. So I'll just keep this nearby, and I'll start with the one that I've done already with the outline that's easy to see. And you will definitely want to go lighter. Like, I've penciled these in, traced them pretty dark, just so you can see them on the camera. I would not recommend leaving it this dark. Just have everything as light as possible so you can actually still see your word to be able to fill it in, but you don't want to have things like crazy dark, because those pencil lines won't go away for you. So I'm going to put a little bit of water in my quinacridone rose here, and I'm going to use kind of a watered down version of this pinky color and just basically fill in the shape. So I'm going a little thicker here, and maybe I'll take a little bit more rose, this time a little more concentrated as I come here where I'm going thick, as I come here where I'm going thin. And then when I come here, I'll go thicker again. And you can take it in one single stroke, or if you feel better doing multiple small passes, you can. And once I fill that in, you can see I just dropped extra pigment, a little more wet here. You can see how that's just flowing together beautifully. Once you've got that letter, or even part of a letter done, you can come in to your other colors. I'm going to take a little bit of this yellow, drop a little bit of it in so we kind of get a goldish color. And then, like I say, we're going to keep the yellow and the purple separate from each other. This is where you could have another brush on the go. You know what? Let's just use this one for my purple. And I will drop a little bit of purple in this part of the letter so that it's further away from the yellow so we don't get mud. And you can see those colors are just mingling quite beautifully. Let's zoom in so you can see that better. And so that's how I'm going to be doing my lettering. And if you're just, like I say, just copying the outline I provided, you can just go ahead and basically fill in the shapes like that. But what if you want to do your own writing and you don't know where to go thick versus thin? I'm going to show you that now. So we're going to do the same thing. And I don't think you probably need to see this whole thing filled in, because I think you get the point of what I'm going to be doing. Just filling it in with the pink and then dropping bits of yellow in certain places, bits of purple in others. And you're going to see me doing it more detail on my longer verse. Actually, I wonder if we want to put just a tiny more pink in here. It feels like it's almost washed out. Not pink enough. Yeah, I like that better. Okay. So now with this one, so this is where we're going to talk about where do you put your thick and where do you put your thin strokes. So if you've gone ahead and handwritten a word, in my case, I've done the word rejoice. What I'm going to do is I'm taking my quinacridone rose on my brush. And when I come down, like, I'm almost going to trace these as if I'm writing, but when I'm taking my stroke downwards, I'll go thick. And when I take my stroke upwards, I'll go thin. And so that's the concept behind this. So let's just go, we're stroking down. We're going to take a nice thick stroke. So I'm pushing a little harder on my brush. Then I'm going to climb upwards on this R, right? So I'm going upwards. So I want to go nice and thin. When I get to the top, I can start thinking about thickening again. So I can take a thicker stroke as I come down. Stay thin if you're going to do a horizontal, kind of like here. And as you curve down, you can take a thicker stroke once again. You want this to stay fairly wet if you're going to be dropping those extra colors. So this is wet. I'm going to come in, drop a little bit of that pinky color, or sorry, not pinky color, the kind of golden yellow color that I've got here. Sorry about that. So drop a little of that in, and it doesn't matter where you drop the gold or yellow colors versus the purple. It's really just a matter of kind of whatever you think looks nice. And you really just want to avoid putting the purple and the yellow together because they are complementary colors on the color wheel and they will make mud or cancel each other out if you put them side by side. You put a little bit of purple here too if we want. And you can always drop a little water as well if you feel like, you know what, I would like to have just a little bit more flow here. Things are looking a little too tight. Just drop a little water into your letter. And so that's the basic concept. We're going to repeat that though as I write the rest of the word because it's a little bit confusing to remember where you go thick versus thin. So I'm going to start again. So with this E, you do want a nice tip on your brush. This brush is feeling like it's almost slightly losing its tip, but we'll carry on here. So I'm going to go thin because I'm horizontal. Keep your horizontals thin, your upward strokes thin. Now we're at the top of the E. I'm going to zoom out so you can see my pigment. I'm taking some of the quinacridone rose again. So I'm at the top of the E. This is where I'm going to start pressing a little more, doing a nice thick stroke. So the letter is going to get wide there. Then when I come to the bottom of the E, I have to transition. You have to really think of the transitions at the bottom of the letter where you get thin again because we're going upwards. Does that make sense? Let's just go ahead and do the J at the same time because we have a nice long downstroke. Down. Now we've got a transition. I'm kind of getting a sloppy transition here. I feel like the tip of this brush is starting to get a little dull. Anyways, so coming upwards, so I go thin, thin, and thin. And then I'm going to be taking a downward stroke. So when I do the O, I'm going to be going thick down this way, right? Because I'm going down. And then once again, coming upwards, thin. And if you're going to crossover like that, you can keep it thin if you want to. See what I did there? So let's drop some colors in now. Let's add a little bit more. You generally want to take it, you know, at the pace where you feel like you can kind of manage to get your colors dropped in before it dries. If everything dries, the colors won't mingle quite right. So that's where I'm stopping, adding some color, and then I will come back in. Ooh, I'm kind of getting a little close to my yellow there, aren't I? Come in, drop some color in a few places, and then I'll come back in with more pink. You basically just want to take the pause every now and then so that it doesn't dry before you've dropped your other colors. So we'll do a nice thick stroke here. That's kind of pretty. It's pulling the purple from the letter I just did. So I went down thick, coming up thin. Then I'm coming up thin, just that little tiny ways on the C. Then downstroke, thick. Upstroke, thin. Horizontal thin, up thin. And then thick as I come down. As you can kind of see, basically, just follow that same pattern the whole way across the word. And then we'll drop in some extra color. And you can really do this, whoa, kind of slop there. You can do this with any colors that you want. Just, you want to have them, if you're going to work with colors that are contrasting colors, just be aware of where things could get muddy. You can always stick with colors that are side by side on the color wheel. So just like oranges and reds and yellows, those will be fine together. But if you want to cross the color wheel, let me just show you a color wheel because this is going to get confusing if I just say it and don't show it. All right, so here, these colors, as long as you have two primaries, yellow, red, and you make any mixtures with those colors will mingle beautifully together. But once we add a third primary, in this case blue, because there's blue in the purple and there's some blue in the green, if we start working with any of these colors, the mud will start kind of happening if we're not careful. Does that make sense? So you can pretty freely mix all those colors together, or if you were doing like a letter or words that were all these colors, you could get away with doing all of those. And as soon as you start mixing another color together, you're going across the color wheel or getting the third primary into the mixture, that is where you need to be careful. So like in the case of the purple, you can see we end up introducing that third primary, and that's where we have to be careful about mud. But that's the general rule for how you're going to do brush lettering. You can just do your own handwriting, and you're just going to go thick or thin based on whether your stroke is coming up or down. Oh, and if you're wondering what side of the pencil line to go thick versus thin, it doesn't really matter. It's really just a matter of getting it on there in a way that feels comfortable so the letters feel like they're fitting together nicely. You don't have to worry about, oh, I'm on the left or the right side of my pencil line that you've written. Just do it so that things are fitting comfortably. So that's just the basic technique for how you're going to write your letters. And if you'd like to watch me do the whole thing, I'm going to be transferring this verse onto watercolor paper, and I'll go ahead and letter everything, and then next time we're going to be painting the peony. If you're enjoying today's video and you want to take your artwork to the next level, you'll want to check out these 2 watercolor rose tutorials. When you purchase either of them during the summer months, you'll have access to some live sessions over Zoom with me, where you can receive support, community, and connection on your watercolor journey. You can ask your most burning questions, and if you would like, you can even get feedback on your work. If that sounds like something you would enjoy, you can find links for those in my Etsy shop in the description below. Now let's get back to painting. So now that you've practiced doing your lettering, you can probably decide which paper you want to use. And as I said, I will be using Arches cold press, but one side is a little more rough than the other. I'm going to be using the smoother side of the cold press paper. So I've got the smooth side up, and then I'm going to just transfer things quick. And I demonstrated this in more detail in another video, but I'm going to put my transfer paper down, and I'm going to have that face down, dirty side downwards towards the paper. And then finally my coloring page. And my coloring page and my paper are about the same size, which is super convenient for laying things out afterwards when I want to trace the peony. Today, all I'll be tracing is the lettering. So you can just go ahead and cut yourself a piece of paper about the size of the coloring page. And then I'm just going to be taping it down. Painter's tape is really good for this because it tends to be a little more gentle on your paper. It doesn't tear, or I should say it doesn't tear the paper as likely. You still have to be careful with it, but I'm just going to go put it in a few corners. I feel like things are set enough, and I'm going to go ahead and trace it. Now you can use any colored pencil for tracing. I kind of like using a bold, bright color so that you will see where you've already traced. The colors aren't showing too well on the black, but that's okay. And you can decide. You can go around the outside like I'm doing here and get yourself the outlines of these thicker letters, or you can just go like this and do a line kind of in the middle or towards the side, and then take artistic license as you go to actually paint and decide where you need to put your thicker line or your thinner line, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to go ahead and trace these. I'm not being super precise, as you just saw me there. Before you fully lift your paper up, you'll want to hold things down and make sure you've transferred everything. I realized I missed my reference, so I'm just laying things out again. Thankfully, things lay out easily because I have the paper about the same size as the coloring page. I'm just going to quickly add the reference. Now, I've abbreviated the First Thessalonians here, but you can, if you prefer to write the full word of Thessalonians, you can definitely do that. Just pencil it in yourself. And at this point, you can go ahead with your pencil, and if there's any areas that you feel you need to be a little bit darker so that they're visible, you can go ahead and do that with a pencil. Or if there's areas that are too dark and smudged, you can go ahead with a kneaded eraser and lift. All right, so what I'm going to do is start with my quinacridone rose, and I'll use it along with water, and then I'll try and splash in a little bit of the yellows and then eventually the purple, but I'm going to try and just stay away from extremes to start with. So I'm going to put a little tiny bit of paint on my brush along with water. Let's see what I actually have here. Yeah, actually that's a nice kind of soft pink color. I'm going to fill this in, and then I'll drop some stronger colors in a second. And just drop in a few spots. Then I'm going to come over here. And coming up, I'm working thin. Coming down, I'm going thick. And then up is thin. And this is a situation where I'm kind of moving more to the left, or sorry, to the right of this line, because I just feel like it is
I'm feeling a little bit squished on the other side. So I'll probably end up kind of shifting this word a little bit. We'll see. I don't want to do too much shifting, but I am shifting a little bit. Ooh, okay, that was a lot of quinacridone rose. I'm just going to dab it off with my brush a bit. And I feel like I'm kind of, the shape of my O is a little bit odd, but it's not terrible. I don't mind a little bit of oddness because I feel like it adds a little bit of that organic look to the work, gives it the idea that it is watercolor and it is hand lettered. Okay, as you can see, I've shifted a little bit from my original. Now I'll figure out where I want to splash in some other color. I have to do it while it's still wet. I've decided to bring another paintbrush into the picture. It doesn't have to be, this particular one is a mixture, like a sable synthetic blend. It does not need to be a blend. I just wanted another very nice skinny brush. And this is a number 4. But that way I'm not going to have to keep washing my other brushes often. So if you have more than one brush to be able to kind of go back and forth, that would be great. Probably would be a little bit more convenient. And you'll have to work fairly fast because if you let things dry, you will end up with blooms. And I feel like that's going to happen pretty soon if I'm not careful. This is getting a bit orange. Throw in a little bit more quinacridone rose. And I am being way more persnickety than I would have to be. If you want this word to have a little less variation in color, you could just stick with like all pinks and pink and water. And that might be the easiest first way to go with this because this is kind of crazy that I've got so many colors going. I wanted to really make it blend with my upcoming peony. But if you want to keep it simple, just choose 2 colors and work with that. You do not need to go with as many colors as I've got there. I think for this word, I am going to try and keep it a little more simple. And this is where it is almost easier to almost hold yourself right above your work, just because this is quite precise and I am holding my brush almost more like a pencil. And I'm not really worrying about thick and thin here. However, if it feels like the brush is, needing more pressure somewhere, I'll try and make that happen when I'm on a downstroke rather than an upstroke. But I'm really just trying to keep this more or less a solid line. And you can see, I kind of like how that worked out. I started out with a little more pigment on my brush, and as I carried on, I just basically ran out of, somewhat ran out of the paint. And so I've got just a nice gradation from dark to light there. And if I wanted to, I could just splash a tiny bit of a color in there. Maybe I'll just use a tiny little bit of purple. I don't want to overdo because I don't want to, you know what, I'm going to put a touch more here. I can tell I can still. I can see there's more, it's wet enough up here. I can get away with a bit of purple there. And try and harmonize that into part of this word here. Do I like that? I don't know. This word will dry faster because it's so thin. So probably need to call it quits right away here so that I don't end up with the goofy edges happening. Okay, let's move on to the next word. Take a nice thick stroke down and then thin coming up, and then another downstroke that's thick. And then I gotta take this curve and come up thin again. Downstroke is thick. And I'm just carrying on with that same concept. Downstrokes are always thick and upstrokes are thin. And it is a smidgen trickier with paint, but it's actually quite a lot of fun once you get the hang of it. And that's one reason why I wanted to start with the lettering first rather than the painting because I kind of feel like the lettering is actually the slightly more challenging part of this project. And if you slop the first time around, if all you've done so far is the lettering, you can just, you know, do it again before we go on to our peony. So we'll see. We'll see if I like my first shot, or I can always try it one more time if I want to. I'm not crazy about the Y, but I might not make a big deal of it because it's not terrible. If anything really terrible happens, that's where I might do a redo, but again, I'm using a purple brush or a separate brush for the purple just so that I can keep my pink brush pink. Do I like what I just did? I kind of liked in some ways the water there, but I was almost getting a little bit too, I don't know, almost too watered out and I couldn't see the word as strong. Now, should I add a little bit of yellow into this word or not? The other thing what you can do is just allow it to dry, because when it hits a certain kind of awkward stage of dryness, you don't really want to come back into it. You can always let it dry and then come in and add a little bit more later if need be. And that's what I'm wondering if I'll have to do. I'm going to try, but I have a feeling the R might be a bit, yeah, it might be a bit dry already. Dabbing my brush off on my paper towel here too. Yeah, I think it was kind of already dry. I'm not sure if I like that. Let's just blot and add a little bit more pink. Again, I keep calling it pink, but we're talking quinacridone rose. Now right here, this word without ceasing, this is, or this phrase, this is going to be our tightest area. So I've got more concentrated paint and I'm just going to try and work really slow. Take my time. This is the hardest part of the whole piece. And if at any time you feel like you need to grab a hairdryer to dry things so that you don't dip yourself, like dip your hand into your wet paint, definitely go ahead and do that. I think I'm going to go ahead and throw a little bit of purple here. I just grabbed the purple with my same brush. Just felt like I could do with a little bit of a darker color in this area, and then I'll probably try and lighten up as I progress back down the painting. And I'm using the purple here, and I'm using it on this brush just because I feel like this brush is best for the monoline because it is a bit firmer. If you enjoy a soft brush, as I mentioned, go ahead and use a softer one, but I personally find that the firmer brushes are helpful for this section where it's very fine. Running out of space, but that's okay. I'm just going to let this word stretch out a little bit.
And it's kind of interesting for me with these verses. I actually find that the last verse is the one that kind of helps reset my mind for just having a prayerful heart and a rejoicing attitude. And I'm not saying that giving thanks is always exactly natural to me either, but I find it super tangible for me, and it's a way that I can kind of get my mind in the right place. And to do that, I actually like to journal. I get my journal out and I just start writing. And so sometimes it starts with something simple like, thank you, Lord, for my morning coffee. Or I'll remember something he provided at the grocery store for a really good price, maybe a sale or whatever, or a meaningful conversation I had with someone in my life. The other thing I'll thank the Lord for is maybe progress I'm making on a project, or the lessons that I'm learning along the way, or the way he brought me some kind of fresh inspiration when I was dry. And if there's a situation where I'm really struggling to see the good in it, I'll just thank the Lord. You know what? Thank you, Lord, that you can and you do redeem all things, and that you do work all things together for my good and for your purposes. And I find when I start doing this, the Lord brings things to my mind that I go, oh, wow, he's been so faithful. And when I'm reminded of God's faithfulness, it just changes my heart, it changes the way that I pray, and it also changes my attitude. My mind starts to shift from discouragement and overwhelm to a place of just joy and peace. Taking the time to letter these verses again with you guys and thinking about them, it's just reminding me again how much I do want to keep these verses in my mind and keep applying them day by day because I know it makes such a difference. And I hope that wherever you're at, this verse just encourages you today as well.
Again, I always make sure that my yellow is no longer on my brush or even too close to where I'm planning to put my purples. When I get some purples back in the mixture like I'm doing here, I want to make sure that the yellow is definitely no longer on my brush and that I'm far enough away from the yellow that I don't have these colors mingling. Again, the reference is really hard. It's very small. If you want to have a larger reference, you could definitely draw or write a larger reference, or even just pencil it in and then use just a small fine tip marker if that's the easiest way to get it on here. But your colors might not match, which is why I would recommend just trying your best to use a brush if you can, or the watercolor pencil, and just keep things really nice and fine.
If you'd like to follow along with the Peony, you can find a link for that video in the description below. In the meantime, I hope this tutorial has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, and that it's inspired you to continue enjoying your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye!